This one got a little political. So as many of you know, the lightning round videos on this channel are basically where I take questions from Patreon supporters and I answer their questions. They're usually around science-y topics or mystery topics or just stuff that's going on in the world topics. But they are sometimes a good barometer, I feel like, for how people are thinking or what people are thinking about. And for reasons we could only speculate on, it seems like politics are on people's minds right now. JD Creeper asked, every quote-unquote futurist channel, including you, believes the future of transport is zero-emissions robotaxis. What about walkable, bikeable cities, a decent public transit network to reduce car dependency? I feel like that's a false dichotomy. Yeah, I don't know anybody that talks about autonomous cars and robotaxis and that kind of thing that doesn't also want walkable cities and better public transport. So, I mean, like, just to be clear, I live in a city that does not have very good public transport. Like it's there, and I've definitely used it before. I live in Dallas, and the DART network is not bad. If you live close to a train station, there's just not that many train stations. Once upon a time I did, and I worked downtown, I took the train every day. I loved it. But no, whenever I go to a walkable city, it's usually on the East Coast, because that was, you know, how they built them back then. But I love it, and I want to see more of that. I'm absolutely a fan of light rail. I'm a fan of public transport. There needs to be more of that. But I think that JD's question is fair, because I really don't talk about that very much on this channel. And it's kind of maybe had to think a little bit about why don't I talk about this that much. By the way, I do follow and want to shout out a few channels that talk quite a bit about public transit. There's Not Just Bikes, Jason Slaughter, friend of mine, Dave Amos at City Beautiful, and City Nerd, whose real name is Ray Delahanty. Yeah, I think that, you know, the robo-taxis thing, it's just new technology, so there's more going on, there's more to talk about. But another thing is, I think it's also just sort of an acceptance that, at least west of the Mississippi for the most part, our cities were built for cars. Like, they have been structured around cars. Our entire society has been. And it would be a lot harder to install, not just install new light rail and public transit, but you would basically have to be reshaping all of like the society of the towns that we live in now, which I don't disagree with the idea that it would be better to do that. I'm just saying that that is a much bigger load to lift. That's going to cost a lot more than people just buying autonomous cars that are making use of the current infrastructure that we have to be better than what we currently have. But I think it's fair to say I do talk about it more than I do public transit. It's just because that seems like a category that's sort of not a part of what I cover on my channel. Like, one thing that I'm really excited about, and I know it's going to be a long-term thing, I'm probably going to be 70 years old if this thing were to ever happen, but the Trans-Texas Corridor, the idea of building a maglev system between Dallas-Fort Worth and Houston, and eventually like Austin and San Antonio. I'm a huge fan of that. I think Texas is the perfect place for it. Those cities are just far enough away that it's like too far to drive, but it's too short to fly. Maybe I'll do a video on the Trans-Texas Corridor. I mean, I'm interested in it. Massman asked, how capable do you think North America is of tearing away from oil-based energy and actually turning towards free or green energy sources? First of all, I would argue that free and green are two different things, but I get where you're coming from. Pedantic. My answer would be not great, not anytime soon, not completely. So I just finished a book by Vaclav Smil called How the World Really Works. For the record, this is the third Vaclav Smil book that I've bought, and the first one that I've actually read all the way through. It's dense stuff. Now, it is a good book if you're into this kind of thing. I know that Bill Gates, it's his favorite author, and he talks a lot about, basically the things that actually power modern civilization. And he talks about the four pillars, what he calls the four pillars of civilization, which are concrete, plastic, ammonia, and steel. And the thing about those four pillars is all of them rely on fossil fuels in some way. So concrete and steel, obviously, are because of all the construction, the growth that we're seeing in the cities and whatnot, and the infrastructure that we need for modern society. Concrete and steel play a big part in that. And both of them contribute significantly to the CO2 in the atmosphere. Plastic, obviously, is made out of petroleum, and it's in literally everything now. I've done multiple videos about that, but it is a ubiquitous part of our modern society at this point. And ammonia is used to create fertilizer through the Haber-Bosch process, and that is done through the use of natural gas. But anyway, the point of it is that we have these four pillars of society, and all of them require fossil fuels in some way. So even if we fully transition our transportation, fully transition our electricity generation over into renewable sources, we still have this need for fossil fuels. So no, I don't think that we're getting away from fossil fuels anytime soon. Now, don't get me wrong, the numbers are going in the right direction, as this chart from Penn State shows. Especially in the coal generation, it's going way down from what it used to be. Natural gas is still pretty big. That's better than coal, though. But the numbers are going in the right direction, but I think we're just going to find that fossil fuels are embedded into our society far deeper than we think they are. Another good example of that is airplanes. We still don't have any way of replacing jet fuel as a way to power, planes around the world the way we do right now. We would have to completely change how we transport people through the air. And we're just nowhere near that. Now, there's only so much fossil fuel on the planet. We will eventually run out of it. I think it's just going to become way too expensive at some point before we just run out of it completely. But that's my thesis here. I think that we need to be transforming as much as we can physically do, because there's some things that we just can't get rid of, and we're going to need it for that later on. Cole Parker asks, now that we know that we both want to see life on floating cities on Venus, speculate about how you could use your friendship with Tim Dodd to implant the idea into Elon Musk's head so that he follows up. I'm sure Elon is well aware of any ideas of setting up floating cities on Venus, but I don't know. He seems a little busy right now. So, yeah. Next up, Jackery asked, as a fellow Texan obsessed with science, what can the average Joe do to combat this state's seeming aversion to decent science education? Oh boy. Well, so first of all, you didn't go into any specifics on this, so I'm not sure if there's a specific science-related thing that the state seems to be against that you are upset about. So I had to kind of look around a little bit to see what might be going on science-related when it comes to Texas. So I did a little snooping around, and I found this article from 2023 from the Texas Tribune that says Texas Board rejects many science textbooks over climate change messaging. But it gets more complicated than just that. Like just this, the very first paragraph here, it says, a Republican-controlled Texas State Board of Education on Friday rejected 7 of 12 proposed science textbooks for 8th graders that for the first time will require them to include information on climate change. So they're like rejecting books that talk about climate change, even though apparently it's required to talk about climate change. That kind of tripped me up a little bit. So yeah, jumping down a little bit, it says here, a science curriculum overhaul approved 2 years ago through 8th grade science textbooks, in particular into the political fray. The new standards will require, for the first time next year, that Texas 8th graders learn about climate change, meaning that textbook manufacturers had to update their teaching materials. So first of all, let's just, be stunned by the fact that, the Texas Board of Education required that they talk about climate change in textbooks. That alone kind of blows my mind. So maybe there's a bright light there. But it gets into some details here. So it says, Texas is one of only 6 states that does not use the next generation science standards to guide its K-12 science curriculum. The standards emphasize that climate change is real, severe, and caused by humans and can be mitigated with actions that reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But what we go on here in Texas is the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills curriculum, or TEX. It says that the 8th graders learn about climate change and describe how human activities can influence the climate, but it argues that the requirements don't ensure students will learn about reducing greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels. So they're required to talk about it, but not talk about any solutions to it, if that makes sense. Now, there is something very telling right down here. It says, in 2021, Texas lawmakers prohibited state funds, such as the Texas retirement system, or the teacher retirement system of Texas, from contracting with or investing in companies that divest from oil, natural gas, and coal companies. I'm sure there's no lobbying money behind that whatsoever. The big thing that's going on in education here in Texas right now is SB 2, which is the bill where they're trying to create private school vouchers, take public funds and put them into private school vouchers. This is not a new thing. They've been working on this for a long time, but it kind of sailed through the Senate, and it's on the way to the House. Very likely will get passed. And it stirred up a lot of emotions on your social media, on my social media anyway. I mean, the people who are for it think that private schools are just sort of inherently better, more qualified schools than public schools. That does tend to be the case just because they cost so much more money to go to private schools. They get more money. It's for wealthy people generally. But this SB2 basically would set aside $10,000 per student to get a private school voucher. And the problem is, though, private schools don't just cost $10,000. A lot of them cost a lot more than that, $30,000, $40,000. So if you can only afford to send your kid to a free public school, free out of your taxes anyway, public school, and you get a $10,000 voucher, but you still have to pay $20,000 to send them to I mean, that doesn't really help you. It doesn't really help the poorest people. It kind of helps the people that are like on the margin of poor and middle class, maybe. Or people who are already sending their kids to private school and are wealthy and just getting a $10,000 tax rebate, basically. Now, my particular argument against it is just simply it comes from where I grew up, because I grew up in a really small Texas town. I've mentioned this many times. And, we only had one school. We had the public school. We didn't have arts magnet schools. We didn't have technical schools. We didn't have, charter schools or private schools or, church schools. We just had the school, the public school. So, like, if I had gotten a voucher for $1 million, it wouldn't have made a difference. Like, that was not an option where I grew up. And that's true in my hometown. That's true in thousands of small towns across Texas. So, I'm sorry, like, my perspective on it is shaped by that. And what I see is it's a redistribution of funds out of small towns into cities. But the people who live in these small towns are voting in droves for the politicians that are pushing this thing that's taking funds out of their towns and moving it into cities. As far as what you can do outside of just calling your representatives and complaining about it, or complaining on social media, which doesn't do anything, don't know what else to tell you. It's something that's kind of flying through right now, and I don't know. Vote against it next time around. I don't know what to tell you. Keeping with the political theme today, Fishtail asked, do you find that the views you hold seem to be sliding on the political spectrum throughout the years, even though you haven't changed them? I think if I were to be honest with myself, I think if all of us were to be honest with ourselves, we'd find that our positions have changed more than maybe we think they have over the years. It's just that it all happened very internally, and it happened slowly over time, so we don't really notice it quite to the level that maybe people outside of us might have noticed. So, I mean, yeah, initially I would just kind of push back on the idea that my opinions haven't changed. I think they probably have. It doesn't really feel like it, but I'm sure they have, and I think that's true of most people. But what you're referring to is what they call the Overton Window. And it's basically the window of acceptable policy ideas or political ideas within a society. To be a little bit more specific with it, it's kind of like this safe zone for politicians to be in. They don't want to really go too far outside the Overton Window because that would threaten their chances to get reelected next time around. But it's not necessarily a behemoth political left to right thing, that exists in. Like, a politician in a red state has a different Overton Window than a politician in a blue state. There's certain things that are very safe to say in Colorado that maybe aren't as safe to say in Alabama. But there are also different Overton windows based on different issues. Like, for example, LGBT rights over the years since the 90s has definitely shifted more left, whereas tax policy has shifted more right. And it does go in both directions, but there's always people trying to shift the window one way or another by being really extreme in one way or another. And to me, it makes me not take those extreme views seriously. I don't think that they necessarily even really believe in it. They just want to shift everybody's opinion that way so that they can get more, closer to what they really want in that direction. Which I've become really, I guess, jaded about, what I see online now from people. Like, I just don't even believe people really think half of the things that they say. It's either trolling or it's like trying to push the Overton Window one way or another. I think that it actually affects what happens online, especially, a lot more than we think it does. So it's an interesting topic. All right, we got one more question, but before we get to that, we got to put Zoe's arm to work, blessing all of the new people that have signed up in the Patreon and memberships over the last month. Let's hit them up real quick. We got Chris Franco, Brianna Chavez, Dr. Matthew, Randy Boone, who actually is somebody I grew up with. Randy, good to see you. A.A. Ron, Yanko Kennedy, Angela Miller, Bobo Jenkins, Shelp Family, Critter Keeper, Andrew Alt, Bray Lee, and Simone Ryan. Those are Patreon supporters. And the members, we have Ricky John Kurtman, Silly Shrimp, Brody Swaggerton, Mon Hell, Carolyn Foltz, Wump Wump, Gabe, Regina Benez, Un Manuko, Paul Knight, Tony, Paul Schneider, Olaf the Black 2012, Sam Antha, Julie C., Ross Richards, Hunter Treadway, Gonna Get a Life, Harley Shelton, Michael Langley, Dave E., Sketty Tooth John, Justin Giordi, Alice J., Skefnia, Jink, Juan Lucio, and Dan K. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you want to join them and get blessed by Zoe, you can hit the little join button down below to be a member, or go to patreon.com/answerswithjoe to sign up for Patreon. All right, next up, Ashbale asked, who would you consider the Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos of the medieval era? Well, first of all, you spelled the word medieval right. That's no small task, so big win. So those two guys are a lot of different things. So I guess it kind of depends on which one of those things you're referring to. Like if you see them as people who have moved technology forward in one way or another, there wasn't really a lot of forward momentum in technology in the Middle Ages. That's kind of what defines that time period. That's a very Europe-centric view, I should say. There was a lot going on in the Middle East and in China at that time, especially around like math and engineering and stuff like that. Now, if you singled out those two because of their involvement in like space stuff, then you might compare them with the explorers of the time, people like Marco Polo or Ibn Battuta. Even though they aren't doing the exploring themselves, they're kind of funding the exploring. So maybe whoever funded Marco Polo and whatnot. I would argue the better comparison would be to consider them the oligarchs that they've become in our society at this point. And then you could compare them to like the medieval lords of the feudal era. Like there weren't corporations to speak of back then. So you can't really compare it to that. That wasn't really a thing. I think the best analogy would be like the great noble houses of the feudal era, like the Habsburgs, the Plantagenets, the Medicis would be a good example. Which actually is kind of interesting because there is an idea starting to spin around that we're kind of entering a new feudal age, like a digital feudal age, that like the wealth inequality is getting to the point where everything's in the hands of a few digital landholding class of lords. This is an idea called Technofeudalism. It was coined by a Greek economist named Yanis Varoufakis, and he wrote a book about this a couple years ago. I haven't read the book, but I think the general conceit is that there's a lot of correlations between where things are heading right now and the feudal system that we used to live in. So like just for context, under the feudal system, like the land and everything on the land, was owned by the lord, who was usually given that land by the king. The lord would then assign a vassal who actually would oversee the land, or the fief. It was called a fiefdom. And that vassal would then declare like an oath of loyalty to the lord. They had this whole ceremony that they did. And then they would hire knights and like security and an army. They would raise an army of knights to like defend that land in service of the lord. And then, of course, you had like the peasants and the serfs who actually worked the land. And part of the knight's duty was to protect them. That was kind of like part of the deal, was they got protection from the lord and the vassal through their knights. But that's kind of all they got. Like any food that they planted or grew, like that belonged to the lord. Like any resources they extracted, any food they grew, that belonged to the lord. Nobody owned anything except the lord of the fiefdom. There was no private property. There was just the lord's property. So the corollary there is like, you know how nobody really owns like music or movies anymore? We all just kind of stream it from various entertainment platforms. I was actually thinking about this over Christmas, how like it used to be a lot easier to buy things for people because you could just buy somebody a CD from an artist that they liked, or buy them a movie on DVD, and you can't really do that anymore. You can't just like buy people music or movies anymore. You have to like, I feel like that makes it a lot harder. It used to be very simple. Somebody likes a movie, you just buy the DVD. But it's kind of been a whole thing lately that people have been getting upset about, is that like these streaming services, they can just stop carrying certain movies or albums. If you're listening to music, like they can just stop carrying it anytime they want. And suddenly there's no access to it anymore because you never actually owned that album. You never actually owned that movie. You were just kind of renting it from this service. And on social media, like nobody owns anything on social media anymore. It's all just like part of the platform now. A platform that's owned by some of the wealthiest people on the planet. And that's the thing, like if you think of the digital space, if you think of the internet or whatever, as like actual land, then it's these tech CEOs that basically like created their own fiefdoms where they own everything and you own nothing. And in fact, since these social platforms especially, like, they rely on users to upload their own content with little or no payment for that content on a lot of the platforms, it kind of makes those people like digital serfs. Like Varoufakis likes to use the term cloud serfs. The point being that they're doing work that adds value to the platform, but they do not get to share in that value. But it gets even worse because at least like the medieval peasants and serfs like knew the deal. They knew that they didn't have, ownership over anything, but they did it for the protection and whatnot. The digital serfs, or the cloud serfs of today, don't even know that they're being serfs. They're working willingly for free and have no idea that they're serfs at all. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's interesting to think about. Now, whether or not we're actually approaching something like techno-feudalism, I don't know. We're definitely seeing a higher level oligarchical class, especially in the United States, that we never have seen before, not since maybe the Gilded Age. But I will point out, I think it's not too far off from a lot of like the cyberpunk aesthetics that you would see in like Blade Runner and whatnot. Those futuristic films and books that take place in this world that doesn't really have governments anymore. It's just corporations that run everything. There's a lot of books and films in that genre of corporations running everything. And it is, I gotta say, starting to feel like we're heading toward that. If it's not techno-feudalism, it's something cyberpunk like that, where whether that's a good thing or not, I don't think it's a good thing, but I guess I'll let you guys fight that out in the comments. Okay, so that was a lot more politics than I normally talk about, so if you're still watching, I appreciate it. Thanks for sticking around. But if you need to kind of cleanse your palate after all that, I've got just the thing. Okay, so you know the riff tracks guys, the guys that do like the funny voiceovers on top of bad movies, they're on Nebula now, which is really exciting for me. I'm totally jealous of those guys that they get to do that. In fact, I actually host a bad movie night with friends from time to time where we watch bad movies and make jokes around it. Never made a career around it though. But yeah, they're on Nebula now, where you can see their stuff ad-free, plus they've got Nebula exclusive videos you can't find anywhere else, including their most recent one called Laser Mission. Nebula's been getting into more film and entertainment stuff recently with their original productions like Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend, but they also just signed filmmaker Wesley Wang to shoot original short films. You can see his stuff on Nebula right now. And that's always kind of been the goal at Nebula, to be a place where YouTube creators can experiment and push creative boundaries. They'll have to, be beholden to the YouTube rules. People are always asking me, what's the best way to support the channel? What's the best way to support me? And yeah, all the support is helpful, but signing up for Nebula kind of helps support longer term plays of doing big dream projects, which is super important for a creative person like me. Plus, not only are you supporting me, you're supporting a whole bunch of other thoughtful creators, many of them in the tech and educational space like I am. If you like the kind of stuff that I do, Nebula is just like a curated playlist of people who do similar things to me, and people who frankly inspire me. So if you want to support me, along with hundreds of other creators, and get a ton of great content in return, just go to nebula.tv/Joe Scott. You'll get 40% off an annual subscription, which brings it down to $36 a year, basically $3 a month. Or, and I still can't believe they're actually doing this, you can sign up for a lifetime subscription. You just pay once and get free Nebula for the rest of your life, if, you think you might need something to watch in 23 years. Also, I always include extra material in my Nebula uploads. I call them Nebula Extra Facts, stuff that I can't really share on YouTube. Also, sometimes I'll put uncensored clips that would normally get me in trouble on YouTube. I put those up on Nebula because there I treat you like an adult. So anyway, go check it out. It's nebula.tv/Joe Scott, or just click the link down in the description. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to the people on Patreon for your questions. If you would like to ask a question along with them, you can go to patreon.com/answerswithjoe, sign up at the solar system level and beyond, I think it is. And yeah, you can, that gives you access to the questions, and you can get them answered in a lightning round video such as this. Now, if this is your first time here, this is a lightning round video, which is not my normal thing. It's kind of something I do once a month. It's sort of a giving back to the community kind of thing. But I'll put a little video up here that you can go check out that's more like my normal stuff. You can look at the sidebar, look at what YouTube is recommending. I invite you to go check it out, and if you enjoy it, I invite you to subscribe. I come back with videos every Monday, or as much as possible. But that's it for today. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week, stay safe, and I'll see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care.